He has done Masters in Conservation from SPA Delhi, and he has also done a specialization in wood conservation at Oslo, Norway, with an ICCROM fellowship. He is actively involved with the Bangalore Chapter of India's largest NGO of space of heritage, which is INTACH, and he's leading their technical team towards the successful completion of many conservation projects. I will name only a few of them, which are the restoration of Chamaraja Memorial Hall and the government mines schools at SHivamogga, restored under Smart City, restoration of Fort High School, and NIMHANS. And he has also led the team at INTACH to prepare the nomination dossier for getting the World Heritage status for the Sacred Ensembles of Hoysalas. I hope I am pronouncing it right. The dossier has been submitted to UNESCO as an official nomination from India for this year, and it is coming up for nomination in July 2023. He is also a partner at Saythu, a conservation collaborative which works on the diverse range of conservation projects. And the need to share history from a larger perspective has resulted in him taking people for heritage walks in Bangalore, on tours of historical sites, including many World Heritage sites in India. He strongly believes in taking the learnings from the classroom to the field and vice versa. And therefore, he's very actively involved in academics as a visiting faculty to architectural colleges in India for postgraduate courses in architectural conservation. He's also recently spoken at Tedx platform on reinterpreting the past for the future. And he has published a monograph on domes and vaults of South India in 2007. His project on Brig Annexe Hill at Bangalore Club was awarded the Lg-Archidesign Critics Choice Award. So we welcome you.
Maybe repetitive because Balio and I work together on many projects for INTACH. He often is the contractor because he has a wonderful skilled team in traditional materials. So there may be some duplication, but I try to present it from a different angle or the same projects which are there. Yeah. So yeah, I'll be talking on the services aspect. So how the retrofitting takes place and how when we are doing interventions, what guides us, what are the challenges that we have, how we interact with other professionals, because not everything can be done by us. We still need the support of many other professionals. And it's important how the interaction happens because they come from a different background, we have a different objective to the project and so on. So I'll explain that with the projects. So you've been all hearing it, and I've been attending many sessions since Monday, and we all know about this, but just to reiterate once again that we are looking at vernacular architecture, which goes beyond just buildings. It goes to the settlements. We are talking of public buildings also, because largely we shouldn't have it in the mind that when we are talking about vernacular, it's like residence of few people, communities and so on. But there are public buildings also. It's a style of architecture, right? Materials, construction techniques. We are looking at how they've responded to socio-culture, traditional occupations, and the indigenous knowledge and the systems that are developed, because they are very contextual, very low. Come across some challenges wherein it was a great learning for us when we could understand what is the local system and then adapt it to our projects. So one thing very important that we need to really understand, if we are calling vernacular as a heritage, vernacular is like an evolving thing. It's got its continuity. It's a living heritage, right? It's got the living traditions. It's got the living culture. It's got the living techniques, technologies, and materials. So for whom are we doing these projects? When we are working on the restoration of these, the question is, whose project is it? Whose heritage is it? Are we going to look at it from our perspective, or is it the community who's living there or who's going to take it up? So always that big question is very important for us to ask when we come up with any proposals or any kind of intervention methods, whose heritage is it? And there's no definite answer, but this is a point that needs to be thought about at the beginning of any project. So what guides us when we are doing conservation? So many times, I mean, across the board of conservation projects, there are many things that guide us. Of course, there are legal laws which are there, which is by ASI and the state departments. But there are certain guidelines which are done at international level, which are called as charters. There's this scientific body called ICCROM, which is also an advisory to UNESCO. They have prepared many different charters. And the whole idea was that, can there be a common approach which is followed internationally across the countries, so that everybody is not doing a different way of conserving the heritage or preserving the heritage. So in 1999, so they have many charters which they've prepared. Earlier it was very monument oriented, but over the time they've become very specific because they understood that it's not one way of addressing everything. So then they started having charters for different aspects, different subjects. Like from monuments, they went on to gardens, they went on to urban cities and historic cities. And in 1999, they had one on built vernacular heritage. So this is something which is being looked at international level. So what is this built vernacular heritage? So I'll just go through some very significant points which it mentions. And as I said, these are guidelines. Sorry. So if you're looking at the charters, you're looking at certain guidelines which are given by them, right? So when you're looking at, okay, how do you identify something as vernacular? It appears informal, but nevertheless, it's defining vernacular. Nevertheless, orderly. It is utilitarian and at the same time possesses interest and beauty. It is a focus of contemporary life and at the same time a record of the history of society. That's why we keep saying the evolution of the vernacular is very important for us to look at. Although it is the work of man, it is also the creation of time. How to reduce this? Okay. It is a fundamental expression of the culture of a community, of its relationship with its territory, and at the same time the expression of the world's cultural diversity. And then it gives a different kind of examples which we have been talking about. Many of them have presented on this manner of building shared by the community, recognizable local or regional character, and so on. What's interesting is point number 2 and 3. The appreciation and successful protection of the vernacular heritage depends on the involvement and support of the community. This is a very important point for us from every angle. Like finally, when we are restoring buildings, post-restoration, what happens to the building? Who takes care of it? Who will manage it? Who will continue to live in it? Therefore, how do you involve the community who's part of it, who's going to be part of this? That has to be very well worked out, and they have to be involved from day one. Because finally, they are the stakeholders. It is their heritage that we are looking at. Government and responsible authorities must recognize the right of all communities to maintain their living traditions. It is clearly recognizing that there are living traditions which are there. It's cultural traditions, building traditions, whatever we are talking about. Many times there are also management traditions which are there, which is much more successful than implying the modern methods of management and so on. So at all levels, this is kind of to be thought of. Due to the homogenization of culture and of global socio-economic transformation, vernacular settlements all around the world are extremely vulnerable, facing serious problems of obsolescence, internal equilibrium, and integration. So what are the principles when you have to conserve a vernacular heritage? This again, the charter says that it has to be a multidisciplinary exercise. Contemporary work on vernacular buildings should respect their cultural value. It doesn't stop you from that. If you consider it heritage, it should not expand, it should remain that way. But how does a contemporary edition respect the cultural values, which is what is giving the character to them? Right? The vernacular is only seldom represented by single structures. So, and it is best conserved by maintaining and preserving groups and settlements. I think this has been reiterated by many of them over the last few days, that how we are looking at clusters and settlements is an integral part of the cultural landscape. Now, this is very broad-based thinking, that what we are looking at is a landscape that has been defined by man, defined by the traditions, defined by the culture. So finally, the settlement that has emerged, the built form that emerged is basically a product of that. So are we recognizing that landscape in which this vernacular heritage becomes part of? Sometimes the religious landscape is there, cultural landscapes are there. So we need to have this understanding of cultural landscapes. We need to take that recognition of that vernacular beyond just looking at the building traditions, but with a deeper meaning that it may have. So vernacular embraces not only the physical form and fabric of the building structure and spaces, but the ways in which they are used and understood, and the traditions and the intangible associations. Many places we find vernacular where there are paintings which are done on the houses and so on, right? Varli, Chitara, you go to Bhuj area, Kutch area, you will find them. They're all part of, integral part of the traditions which are there, and they have a lot of meaning in the expressions that are being carried out. So what are the guidelines that the charter suggests? That we should do a proper research and documentation. The integrity of the siting, that is the relationship of the physical and cultural landscape, needs to be understood. Traditional building systems, continuity of the traditional building system and craft skills. So if we are doing a contemporary edition, are we looking at involving these traditional skills which are already seen in those buildings or in that region? Are we involving the craftsmen who are there, who already have the skills? This is something that we try in many restoration projects. It may not be all our restoration projects, we can do it, but many times, for example, when you're doing lime and woodwork, we try to involve the same traditional skills or the joinery details or the understanding of the material which is there. Adaptation and reuse of vernacular structure should be carried out in a manner which respects the integrity of the structure. So yes, adaptive reuse for the contemporary relevance of those structures or taking it forward, we will need to look at having these structures, right? So in preserving or conserving them, we try to see how, when you're doing these changes, you're respecting the values that this place has, the integrity which it has. And integrity means that it's not like you're just looking at stylistic elements. You're looking from one to the rest of it. Changes over the time should be appreciated and understood as important aspects. We are not going back in time. We are adding in time to these places, and whatever's happened to it over time is equally to be respected. That's what the evolutions are. Training in order to conserve the cultural values is a very important step, because they say that the continuity of the building traditions and all can happen only with the training, capacity building, and so on. So these are the advices and guidelines which the charter presents. So I have a small disclaimer to make, like, so the projects that I'm going to be talking about, some of them are clearly vernacular, some of them, but there are other examples also I have taken, may not be directly from vernacular, but from the services point of view when you're dealing with a heritage building. But the point is that, can these be adapted to any of the projects that you may be doing tomorrow? So that was the whole idea, that I am taking in projects or examples even from some of the other typology of buildings. So talking about retrofitting, where does that happen, right? At what levels are we looking at retrofitting? So it can happen at the structural level, wherein the entire presentation by Mr. Balihus, who was there earlier, he was talking of structural retrofitting works. It can happen at spatial level, when you have to modify certain spaces, when you have to do a reuse, there will be spatial modifications that will come up. Then at materials, like what are the materials which are there, traditional materials are there, new materials are there, compatibility of it, all these things are to be thought about. So there also the retrofitting happens, consolidations happen. Then, of course, the services, like how do you kind of look at contemporary services being included or integrated in that built form? So when does the need for this retrofitting emerge? Right? One, maybe when we are looking at upgrading the lifestyle. So people who are living over there wants a better lifestyle, wants a better quality of life. Maybe they want a better quality of lighting in that place. Maybe they want the modern amenities, like they want the toilets which are there, which has to be more, with today's time, today's comfort level. All these things have to be thought about. It's not like we want them to stay in the same way that the building was meant to, was built as. So that adaptation has to come, that upgradation has to come. And that becomes one of the challenging things. Right? Now, sometimes it's a subdivision of the property with multiple owners. So maybe now each owner will have their own requirement. Right. So there may be modifications required according to that. Maybe they want, everybody wants a kitchen and a bed, bathroom and all those things which are required. So that again leads to retrofitting in that particular place. Adaptive reuse. So when you're completely changing the use for which the structure was built for, okay, it may lead to retrofitting works. Then we have additions that we may do, like we are kind of adapting it in today's context, and that structure may lead to certain additions, certain requirement of additional spaces and so on. So at all these levels, one thing we have to be careful is that what are the values which are embedded in that vernacular? Are we looking at the continuity of these values? Conservation actually means that you're doing continuity and keeping those values in. So what are the challenges that we find when we are conserving many vernacular structures? So the traditional knowledge of construction, materials, services, which is an area where a lot of research is yet to be done. Research is happening, as we know that there are not many people who are here available who are trained in this. So a lot of that is still a challenge for us. We do a lot of documentation, we do begin with that, but then we still need a lot more information, because as we know in vernacular, from region to region, from area to area, it will change. We can't kind of have the same approach or same methods going over there. Retrofitting with modern, traditional versus modern methods, like, sorry, they're repeating that, traditional versus modern method. Are we not going to use any modern methods, new techniques which are available? Why not? See, the whole idea is respecting the values, continuity of the values, and compatibility. If we are able to do that, then even modern methods may be applicable to them. So we try to do research on that. We try to do a lot of literature study. We try to see the examples of where it has been executed or done. So a lot of that dialogue has to happen before we conclude, okay, that this may be acceptable. So it's not just that only traditional approach is the right approach for vernacular. We are looking at clearly a synergy of even the new things that are coming. Availability of traditional skills is a huge challenge. Like, where are the people who are going to work on this? Then, when we are working on services specifically, you all know that, I mean, as professionals and architects, that we try to get experts. It's not that we are the experts in this subject, okay? But when we get them, how do we work with a team who's probably not tuned to heritage, not tuned to understanding of the vernacular architecture and so on, vernacular monuments? So that becomes a big challenge, because whatever they're going to propose will have an impact on the design. And I'll show you some examples of that. So you have to probably make it clear to them that, okay, what is the thing that you can allow, or what is it that needs to be retained? And then they have to come up with solutions. We kind of often dialogue with them over some solutions which cannot be applicable because it's heritage. It may be some wonderful solutions. Simple things like they will come and say that, okay, let's run all the lights on the ceiling and you can always have a false ceiling. And that's something which we never want to have. In many of our constructions, we really want to see the structural integrity of that place. We want to have that spatial character, which probably sloping roofs give, or the Madras terrace roof give. So we don't want that to be lost. So such things are there, and that needs a dialogue. But it is always good to have them because they have a good idea of what has worked, what are the lacunae in many of the things, and what are the new methods that have come up, which may be more efficient, which may be more important for that particular requirement. Then understanding of technical specifications when we are selecting a certain approach or selecting certain products. Again, I will show you many examples of that. How do we understand them? Sometimes as architects, you all know that it becomes vague to us. We say, okay, like you give us this MEP guy gives us all the things and we just pass on. But no. We need to kind of review it because as I said, it can have a direct impact on your design. So we need to know that. And sometimes we also need to know, like, okay, these are fantastic products, but what about its efficiency? What about its maintenance? What about the spare parts availability of it? These are questions which we have been asked by our clients. When we have some clients who are very thorough about their service requirements and all that, when we go for interventions, they ask us these things. And again, something that we have to be aware of. So the approach which we generally take is like a documentation first step. And it is just not measure drawing. Like many times in colleges, documentation is understood as measure drawing exercise. No, it's an understanding that develops from the exercise of, measure drawings and archival research and all those things, and understanding that we can get. We try to approach that as much as the solutions of services and so on can come from the design itself. Okay. If not that, what are the traditional methods which are available? We try to do research on that also. We try to move around the surrounding areas and so on, try to explore what is happening in that region and what's the familiarity with that, because many times those solutions work much better. I mean, you take examples of water systems and all that. These are fantastic things which are so contextual that local solutions are more applicable there. We evaluate the values which I've been talking about, and looking at, in case these traditional methods don't work, what are the modern solutions which can be adapted to this particular place. So generally we kind of try to do that the last system be the modern solutions. If nothing else is working, that is better then. So I'll now take up some projects and discuss how we have approached them. So this was a project in Virajpet where Neemrana took up the main house and the owners were moving out into another place. And so there was this kind of cottage where they would actually use for, it's a large estate, coffee estate, where they were kind of drying the coffee beans and storing that over there. And then this was the garage which was there. So they wanted to shift to this place. So this is what I'm talking about, spatial retrofitting. So when they wanted to shift this place, it had to adapt to their living standards. It needed the requirements of, let's say, 3 rooms. It needed a nice open space where they could have their coffee, and all those things were there. So, but the structure was quite small, So how do we do it? Can we kind of modify this or reuse this also? You see, it's built as a garage, but can we still create an ambience, the traditional ambience? So we started doing, we worked with the client, and then we came up with this kind of intervention, which basically was a reuse of the garage. We linked it with the main building, made some openings, connected it, so all the living spaces were there. Then this also helped us in creating a courtyard between this structure and the garage. But now the bedrooms and the living space, we just made it more comfortable to approach it and all those things that were there. And this is how the interior spaces, very subtle, but kept it that way. There were false ceilings here, which we removed, the plywood and all. We wanted that volume of those spaces to be there. closed the doors here, made it into like this niche where it could become storage, because that became an attached bathroom inside over there and so on. So through design itself, we try to kind of approach and make modifications to this place. Very minimal in terms of the need of the lighting, and retain the old flooring, which they were very comfortable with. So this is something that we did in Virajpet. Again, this is in Anigundi, not a project that we have done, but Kishkinda Trust, which works over there, has taken a lot of the village houses over there and converted them into homestays and so on, which is quite attractive, because it's just very, close to Hampi. Like, you just cross the river and Anigundi is there. It's also one of the historical villages which is in the core zone of the World Heritage. And these are the kind of spatial transformations that are there. And some things you live with. I mean, for example, you always cannot have in attached bathrooms. You have the common bathrooms. So you live with that. That's a quality of life. And even as a tourist, if you're going and staying over there, that quality of life becomes acceptable to you. And then there are structural retrofitting works which also were there, and then you kind of create spaces in this thing. This again in Coorg we did where, I don't have the before photograph here, but when we modified it to a homestay, we kind of, again, that same thing about quality of the space, quality of better lighting, natural light coming in, because it wasn't there. This window we have created. So only the ventilators were there, otherwise it was a dark space. How do you create a nice ambience? How do you get better quality of life, light and all that in this space? So this kind of interventions are there, where we make a new opening. All those things structurally, many things are possible. The point is, again, the values that you find. The spatial value can always be enhanced. It's not like your interventions are taking away the values, or are becoming very jarring over there, or are negative to that place. If you're making those modifications in a living heritage which allows for a better life, then it is acceptable. So this is what I was saying about false ceilings and so on. Earlier interventions, people have done false ceiling, but it's hiding the entire beautiful thing, the ceiling that's there. And this they do because it's easy. One is that light fixtures become easy for us. Second, whatever's happening in the roof, for example, anything is falling and all that, it all will come and rest in the false ceiling area. So this is a structure of a birthplace, not birthplace, but where a Gyanpith awardee from Karnataka, Shivram Karanth, used to stay and has written great literature. So this was restored. Many times, I just picked up this slide, of course, this is from Kerala, but what I'm trying to bring out is, many times in the design, there are certain features which we need to understand has already been incorporated to address certain climatic requirements and so on. Because in Napier, for example, they had a cavity wall. So when we are moving around this kind of museum space, we see these openings on the top, and on the outside, it's at the floor level. We couldn't relate to it while we were documenting it inside, outside separately. But when you start understanding your building in sections, you start understanding your materials, you start understanding your wall constructions, this is when you realize that this is actually a cavity wall concept, which has been taken to a large public building that is being built. Right? And this worked so well in that place to keep it comfortable. Or joineries. I mean, this is something that we document, because when we are doing retrofitting, when we are doing alterations, it is important for us to understand the traditional joineries that are there and see if that can be used in the way we want to modify things. So again, things like the circular windows and all those things which we see in rose windows, it's basically dissecting the elements. This can happen only when actual work is ongoing, that we dissect it and understand completely the building process of it. Like what kind of joinery with this, the wonderful elements, because what just looks to us like two circles when we draw, and another one circle which shows glass, but there's such complexity in the way it has been done, because how does the behavior, material behavior has been understood by them, is reflected in these things, like how to make wood circles and how to join them and so on. Coming back to Shivram Karan's house, again, as I keep talking about, we've been hearing traditional systems, traditional materials. It's so important to understand. One demonstration is in this project where when we were restoring this place, there is this roofing which is there, and you see there's no vertical element. We always have seen trusses where there'll be either vertical or diagonal, another element which is holding the forces, compressive forces which are coming. So here we had some other way of this, and this is called a scudum in this place, which is basically a coastal region kind of thing, where it's all about countering the forces which are coming from the opposite direction. And this one element is actually holding it all and balancing that entire roofing. So on plan, if we see, this scudum will come here where the diagonals are going this way, and there is this. So it was so important to understand these scudums and the concept of how the structural roof is done. Because we had to replace this member, it was termite infested. We had to kind of design it in that same way. That, and when you start getting into the complexities of it, it is also like, if you start looking at these gaps, they're like made with those angles wherein this diagonal rafter can come and get locked inside. So this is how the carpenters are working on that. All these are traditional carpenters who understand this system so well. Then the entire traditional roofing, Mr. Balasu pointed about the Bangalore tiles. So now we're talking about the structural retrofitting of the sloping roofs, which we have done. Flat roofs, he's talked about, or jack arch roofs of traditional Madras terrace, lime surkey. And we also do kind of research on the historical documents which are available. What do they say? How do they describe the material, whether it was lime, what kind of lime to be used, how should it be processed? All these things we kind of try to research and understand. Similarly, mud, using of mud. So Shivram Karan's house was built with laterite and mud. So we again had to go locally, source somebody who could do this, understand how it has to be done, because the stitching and all were again carried out with that mud mortar itself, because the compatibility becomes very important. You can't use a very stronger mortar when you're kind of doing structural retrofitting. And then again, we have this old PWD specifications which talk about what kind of mud to be used, how it's to be processed. Of course, there will be traditional ways of it also, but this just helps you to keep a check of that. This is one project in Dharwad where we were, again, when now I'm talking about retrofitting with materials and the traditional knowledge. So when we were doing this reconstructions, because there was a collapse, and when there's a collapse, it's a wonderful opportunity to understand traditional systems, like how the roof is built, what is the cross section of the wall, etc., etc. So we had an expert Dr. Yogananda, who understands mud architecture, mud as a material, building material. So we took him around, and then it's quite interesting that we found that this is a place with black cotton soil, where basically meaning that this soil is not so easy to kind of use in construction, right? So how were they building it in that case? I mean, they couldn't have been transporting good mud from somewhere far off. And that curiosity made us to go around the places and still check whether today also they are building in mud. If so, how are they doing it? And we found that they had a certain, when we went to some villages, we found that they call this as a hale mannu, which is old mud. And they have a processing wherein they kind of dig a pit in outside the village and kind of add organic waste to it. And halu mannu it's called. And then that processing over the time kind of modifies that mud, which makes it suitable for construction. So there are traditional ways of how this is done. Now, looking at the next aspect of retrofitting, like electrical, what are the various aspects that comes into picture? So again, here, as I made in the clear earlier that we do take in consultants for many of these projects, but it's also important that we control the project because we understand the values, we understand the character of these places. So for example, the electrical layout, we of course prepare. Okay, can the layout be something that can also enhance the character of that building? The other aspect is the conduiting plan. See, many times as architects, we are happy to do layout and then pass off the drawings. But when we are dealing with heritage buildings, the conduiting plan becomes very, very important. You have to show where the conduiting will go, and see there are different ways of conduiting. One we all know and which is generally followed is the concealed conduiting. But many times, if you're not replastering that area, if there are something important features which are there, we go for exposed conduiting, right? And in that exposed conduiting, because the entire conduiting system will be seen, it's very important you work out your routing. And we do that in all our projects. We work out the routing, we get it marked on the site, we cross-verify it, and then we give an approval. Okay, so we do many times, many of our projects have this wooden casing conduiting system, which is there. So whether you're doing concealed or this, it's better to work out. Even in concealed, I will show you how, what can happen. Like this is all a project which we did, and it's all about concealed conduiting. But when we just gave a brief that, okay, you can go with concealed conduiting, they just go rip apart the building everywhere. They'll go do chasing everywhere. They'll get machineries to chase that. You know, that's how they work generally on any building. But we have to control that. See, the chasing can result in a lot of vibrations getting created, which can loosen up when you're working on a mud mortar building or a lime mortar building. And then how efficient can you make your chasing? Like, can we reduce it? Can we do it in only areas where it's required? Otherwise, they are used to like, okay, you need a point here, you need a point here. They'll just do chasing everywhere. And you can see what is happening, right? So this is unfortunately, oops, sorry, it's upside down. But this is unfortunately how it's happened. And then we had to pack it up and so on because we didn't monitor. The blame should be with us that we didn't monitor the project. And we just gave a general brief that, okay, we are doing concealed conduiting for this building. Now, that's not enough. Or in the case of the other building which we were working on, you give the points, these guys are disregarding any of the architectural features, right? They're just cutting through that arch. When we actually exposed the plastering, we had thought that, okay, this is a beautiful arch, let's keep it exposed and we'll plaster on the sides. So this is where we were trying to keep the arches and plastering the in-between spaces. But our man came and just kind of chased through that arch. And then we just had to replaster the entire thing. So it's very important for us that we kind of do a conduiting plan. Types of fixtures, what kind of fixtures do you need, what modules you need, which kind of switches you need to work to that level of details, which is most suitable for that space. Okay. Today we have requirements like we are doing one building which Mr. Balos showed about the government school in SHivamogga. Today there are needs for smart classrooms. Now you can't deny that. It's like a vernacular public building which is there. And it will be upgraded so that the students get the benefit of smart classrooms. But how do we integrate that? How do we integrate the LCD projectors, the screens that have to come down, the writing boards that are there, or all these, which means that extra switches are required, UPS systems are required. We need to kind of integrate those things. So this is how we kind of work. For example, this is that railway station building, which even he talked about. So this is where we are doing a conduiting plan, clearly working out where exactly the conduit should run, from which direction the light should come out from the building, where the switch points, of course, we all do the switch point and light point, but then at what level will it run? And if it has to be taken out, what will be the routing? So where it can run, whether it will be next to the rafter, it can't be in between two rafters and you start seeing one more element. So how do you kind of take that out? So all those things are worked out in great detail, and then we get it marked, because many times there's a gap. See, all these technical drawings are not very well understood by the craftsmen who are there, unless you have a very good supervisor. They understand, like if you've been working with them for long, they understand how you see the buildings. But otherwise, it's better and safer to get it marked, and then you know that you are on the common page, and then you get it executed. So this is what we do. These are kind of light switches we sourced. So this is lighting that we have done in that building. This is at night. So it's a combination of colonial and vernacular for all these station buildings that came up across the railway line. So we kind of source these switches. They are available at low cost prices. They're available at high cost prices. There are certain brands which are still selling them. See, this again is many times a complaint that, okay, kahan milega, who will have it? Nobody has these kind of things, because easily it will not be available. Like if the contractor is not willing to do it, he will give these excuses. But here, as we said, that we are working with a sensitive contractor who's in the heritage field. And then we also do this market search when we know what product we want, and we go to the market. Maybe after the 5th shop or 6th shop, they will tell you, okay, why don't you go to so-and-so shop? They will give you this thing. Or there are certain brands when we come across them. So if you're looking at a high-end range of a similar kind of style of these things, there are certain brands like Clipsal and SSK who are there. In these, there are brands like OK and all who are still making these kind of products. Again, it's like this is all exposed conduiting. So when you're doing stone work, you really can't do a concealed conduiting. So if in exposed work, how do you do it? What kind of boxes do we make? Because those metal boxes which come may not work very well with the wooden plating that we want, the look. So again, how do you, and they come in standards like, 4 module box and 6 module box. Are they suitable? They may not be suitable because we want probably 2 round ones. So then we kind of customize these boxes also. So all these level of information, we kind of work towards that. So it's not like you've just given one point, okay, switch yahan aayega, it is done. But you have to work to the last level of what kind of switch, and therefore what kind of box and which material has to work. So this does work in some kind of public buildings which have been upgraded for, let's say, as a public hall or a memorial, a place where talks and all can happen. So these are available. Another example I'll give you about how the design gets changed because of the requirement from the services. This is like a gate which we are doing for that house, which has now become a guest house in Ooty for ITC. They've taken, and so on. Very built in that traditional style of Bangalore roofs and mud architecture and all those things. Now, we made some beautiful gate design and all. And then the client came up with a requirement that, no, they want a gate which can open on its, which is like remote controlled kind of thing. You can't expect somebody to always come and open the gate and so on. So basically, which meant like, how can we automate these gates? Right. So then we made we looked for consultants, they looked for a consultant, then they came up with Snyder, and we worked with them like, okay, what are their basic requirements? How does a gate automation work? Right. So there will be some kind of mechanisms, and then there will be some things like a large rectangular box which comes on the gate, and that will help in kind of making it open once the signal is given from the from inside. Okay, so basically what happened is the positioning of their boxes of that element on the gate had to make us bring in some changes to the gate design. Earlier, we did not have this element. We just have the verticals. But later on, when this box was required, we had to introduce some element which could like conceal that box for both the gates. And then the gate had to have a minimum requirement. It cannot be wider than so much and so on. So all these things were discussed, and the gate design itself was adjusted to incorporate this automation which was required. And then we had this company giving in very detailed specification. Now, this is something we need to kind of at least understand what each requirement are. Otherwise, they will give you anything, and we don't know where this come, because then we need to know, okay, when they say remote and photocell sensor, We need to know on the design where that sensor will be placed, where will it come, right? That aspect is very important for us to understand. Then in electricity power calculations, I mean, it's again an important step where we are part of that process, like how much kilowatt of electricity is required for that building. Now that again comes from your design, like what have you proposed? What kind of lighting fixtures have you proposed? What kind of UPS systems or generator system you have proposed? Because all that may, I mean, see, all this becomes important when you're upgrading something, right? When you're making it, especially in adaptive reuse projects, because these become mandatory requirements. And then if they need a DG set, they need to know how much consumption of power the DG set has to be. So we kind of look at all these things and we confirm whether this is okay or not. And then again, in other aspects of services, like it could be water table, plumbing, drainage, sewage, that we again are working along with our consultants. As I said, many traditional methods we are adopting. This is that population hall where we are finding the water table is almost at the floor level. There's a basement, or which is at the ground level. Water table is just about 6 inches below that. So the whole point is, how do we control that water level? Because it is creating dampness. It is almost sometimes when it's heavily raining, it almost seeps from the ground onto the floor. And when it seeps from the walls, then the plaster cannot stay there. You know, it becomes loose and falls off. So what can we do? What are the methods which are there? So we explored that. We got a hydrology expert and we explored with him how to do this. So the biggest options which were given, one option, very traditional option, just do wells, open wells, which will draw out the water, and therefore the water table may reduce in this particular surrounding of the building. So we presented that case to the municipal commission, but what that demanded is that it needs to have pumps which will kind of draw out the water and put them out, it's into a drainage channel and all. Now the question was, who will maintain this? Who will do all this pumping business day in, day out? Whenever the water level rises, you need to pump that out, right? Only then it will draw out the water from the ground. So we understand these concepts when we are discussing with the hydrology person. Now that was a fantastic system, works very well, but then it's got management issues and maintenance issues. So we said, okay, what's an alternative? Then he came up with another alternative, which is this system of a pipe network, which is embedded in the ground, which is laid at such a slope that it will draw water into it. It's got a coating which is given around it, so that on a geofabric covering, which will allow only water to seep into it, and then that is finally taken into a catch basin, and from there, from the chamber, it is kind of drained out. So that is another method which probably we all felt will be more suitable for this particular setting. And in that meeting, this was kind of adopted to now at present. Overhead tanks, another major issue when it comes to the settings and all those things that we talk about. Now, how do we give overhead tanks in places where heritage buildings are so are such a strong visual feature, so if you have to give tanks above the roof, imagine it's a sloping roof structure, you can't give an overhead tank. Will you do a metal stand next to it and then put an overhead tank? Not really a great solution. I mean, in the worst case, this is the simplest thing, and people have done that. But if you want to work alternative to that, what are the ways in which we can do a water supply system which does not affect the aesthetics or visual integrity of that place, right? So one of the things that we worked out in the Ooty project was the hydro-pneumatic systems. And this is a project from Tarangambadi, which was done by Ajit Kaujalgi and by that's INTACH Pondicherry. So they did a beautiful setting. It's a Dutch settlement which they have restored. And in that, to work out water supply, they kind of made a beautiful masonry building with rooms and the water structure here. So this is your storage tank, but then it integrates rooms and spaces and a nice vernacular character to that by this, pan tiles and stone pillars and so on. So this is one beautiful design way of integrating the need of services into your building. And in Ooty, we've done something like the hydro-pneumatic system because we cannot build an overhead tank. So the whole thing was, how do you, get water into your bathrooms and get in great pressure? Earlier also they had some system, but then it doesn't create enough pressure. Like if you have a shower and so on, or if you have these faucets, it doesn't create enough pressure because for that, then you need to have an overhead tank, which is very high. So then we explored different systems which are there. We talk with your MEP consultant, what are the options which are there? Cost becomes one more factor that you need to evaluate. So based on all this, okay, final thing was like hydro-pneumatic pumps would be the best solution, which would directly with pressure from the sump tank, send it to the supply point. Okay. So here we took it and it was a Grundfos unit, which we kind of incorporated. And then came the detailed specifications of it. Again, I'm not going into all those things. Many of the things even I don't understand, though I did ask them. But yeah, I mean, only when it gets executed, some of these things you do pick up. But then some of these things are very, very technical. But as a conceptual framework, it has to follow your objective as a person who's leading the project and controlling the project. And that goes with everything, like what kind of pipelines you're looking at, how will your drainage be, whether you're going to have the concept of catch basin or you will have an open saucer drains. These are things which you need to work out. The details can be given by your consultants who are there, but conceptually which works well. Okay, then the concept of heat pumps which are there, water harvesting pits we try to create in this place. What are the details of that, whether it will be, how will it be built up, and whether it's a recharging well or it's kind of thing which will recycle the water. All these things you have to work out with your client. What is the requirement? If it's a recharging pit, it's a different concept of construction. If it's a water harvesting, you're going to use that water for, let's say, landscaping or for your flushing and so on. It's a different way of working. And this is what we do even in our modern buildings, right? So it's the same concept which we are trying to look at in historical buildings or heritage buildings. It's just that which adapts well to that particular typology of building. Then there are many other things which again comes up in our projects, and these like heating, like if you're building in places which are very cold, which can get very cold, goes down to 0 degree or sometimes -degree temperature. How do you keep the place heated? Lighting arresters, you're building on hills, you need lighting arresters. Some of these are mandatory requirements as per the laws, but then if you're doing a vernacular kind of a building, or if you're doing something which has been built in that style, how do you incorporate these requirements? Okay. So this was for lighting arresters. This is that Ooty building which I've been talking about. So these are some structures within those premises. No, it's a mandatory requirement because it's a public place. Once it's a guest house, and ITC being a brand, they said that we will follow all the laws to the core. So where do you provide your lighting arresters? I mean, the consultant came first and said that, okay, let's provide it here. He proposed this Ashlok system, which is like 5 meter tall. I mean, my building is not that tall, and they're kind of suggesting some rod which goes out over there. And then there was this whole thing that, okay, no, the trees are still taller over here, so why do we need the lightning systems? Traditionally, the trees have worked well. And coincidentally, just a day before or 2 days back, there was a clear news that the trees had caught fire because of lighting, not here but somewhere else. And that again ruled out that we live with the traditional method, that no, we need to do something. So then we said, like, can we do away with these tall things, and can we provide smaller units which can be done based on the design of the structure and based on the character of the structure. So these are things which we explored and worked out an alternative which is there. Heating, we again debated on many concepts when we were doing Ooty. So what kind of heating works best in this kind of a structure or this kind of an environment where you have high volume roofs, sloping roofs are there, high volume. So these are things which these challenges we have to consider, that we can't do false ceiling and reduce the volume so that it becomes easy to keep the place heated and so on. But we wanted that character, we wanted that sense of space, we wanted that ambience which it creates. So we explored again with our consultant, like, what do you suggest? So they came up with one thing called as the radiant heating systems, where the entire floor can just be heated, right? And that's the level where you want the heat to be. So from the floor, your heat can come. Challenge for us, it's a wooden flooring. We are not removing it. Is it feasible then? Not really. But then are there selected areas where you can do? Yes, we can do that. Then there are other methods, like we explored other things like this packaged heating pumps which come without outdoor unit. But the point was, these are imported. Tomorrow, if you need spare parts, where will you get it from? What happens to this company, and who are the dealers with it? How much can we rely on this for a long-term thing? Question mark. So these are ways also to, start deleting out some systems which do not work. Then there are these fireplaces. So there are companies, and it's there in the references in the last, who are making new type of fireplaces. Some of them are just having a heater inside, and they just have this as a visual thing, that it looks like flames are there, but this is just graphics. But actually, it works like a heater. So there are many such systems also which have come out. But there are also people who are making traditional heaters and all that. I mean, they're designer heaters, so-called. Of course, it doesn't really work in this case because the costs were hugely expensive. Then places like these are very local made kind of chimneys or heaters, you can say chimneys, which work very well. I mean, you can just put them in anybody's house or any place, and this works very efficiently in the winters. So we went back after exploring all these to just traditional methods of putting heater in every room, and left it to that, because that seemed to us the most efficient and a system that is manageable. In this building, there was a courtyard. I mean, we in a complete bit of reuse project, we had proposed a courtyard that came up between the buildings. But being Ooty, you can't have an open courtyard, so there was a glass roof that was proposed. Now the catch was that after we built the glass roof, there was a lot of heat the glass was creating, which was trapped inside. Though we had given a lot of exhausts, vents on the sides, but that was not enough because the heat at some time was very strong. Winter's fantastic space to be in, but when it is sunny, it was bad. So then the clients came back and asked us, what can we do now? Okay, so these are all laminated glasses that we have introduced. So one of the solution was that we can have these kind of retractable curtains which are there, which is used. Or we can put a film on that. So then the question was, what film, which film works better? Then we do a complete research with our glass supplier. We come up with the different brands, then the different qualities of glass, and we start looking at, okay, how much solar energy is rejected. So we start looking at all this. We didn't want to just go with the film which is conventionally available, because it kind of affects the quality of light inside, or whether you want to see the sky outside, it affects that. So we were looking at something that cannot really alter the look of the glass or bring in a kind of a shade to it. So we started looking at all these. Then as architects, we had to decide which would be the most appropriate, even though somewhere the energy is less rejected, but maybe from the visible light transmission, that is an important thing for us to look at. So we looked at all these aspects and then came up with a specification which talked about, okay, which kind of film will work best for this particular place. One more very important thing that we have tried out is the carbon footprint, that how conservation is actually helping in reducing carbon footprint. So this is something that when we did this Fort High School building, which you see this beautiful Anglo vernacular structure of 1907, we said that post restoration, how do we kind of evaluate? So there was this engineer, Dr. Varsha, who basically from our structural team was had explored this whole thing. She had just finished her PhD. And she said, then we just requested her, why don't she do this small exercise for us and see whether actually conservation makes sense. Let's see if as the MLA wanted that, okay, you can build a grand new building here and much taller one. Is conservation justified from this angle? So she looked at all these things like the embodied energy, operation energy, the demolition energy, the various materials that are there in this building. And a fantastic information that was really like something that came out is that how, as an existing building, we are conserving much more. Okay, while if a new building would have come up in that place, it would have actually been 10 times more energy consuming rather than what is there. And this is again not considering all the passive factors of how the place is well ventilated, keeps it cool, the thick walls and all that. Okay, thick walls was considered because of the embodied energy of material, but the passive aspects of the vernacular traditions or traditional buildings that we talk about, these things were still not considered, but still we found that 10 times the consumption could have been if there would have been a new building that would have been created. So yeah, these are her observations. I won't get into the details of these. Yeah, that ends my talk. Thank you so much. These are various references of some of the brochures that I've used, the charters and so on. So I'll stop sharing now